Emerald podcast series. Research that makes a difference.
Hi, I'm Charlie Swift, and in this episode, I'm joined by three academics and practitioners who are researching self-compassion and its impact on individuals, families, and workplaces. Our conversation considers the definition, application, and utility of self-compassion practices, why they're increasingly needed, and what the common barriers to adopting them are. We explore the links between populations as apparently diverse as student midwives and military veterans, young parents and corporate employees, and discuss the need for further research on developing, designing, facilitating and evaluating self-compassion education and training programs. My first guest is Dr. Mary Steen.
I'm Mary Steen. I'm the Professor of Midwifery in the Nursing, Midwifery and Health Department, and that's at the University of Northumbria in the United Kingdom, and I have several visiting professorships in other countries around the world.
My second guest is Dr. Diane Wepper.
Hello, my name is Dr. Diane Wepper. I'm the Associate Professor and Professional Lead Mental Health in the Faculty of Health Studies at the University of Bradford.
I'm also joined by Dr. Stephen McGee.
My name is Dr. Stephen McGee, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Success and Associate Clinical Professor within the College of Nursing at The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio.
I began by asking Mary to define self-care and self-compassion.
It's interesting, when I was starting the education and training with nurses and midwives, they were a little bit, we're not sure what self-compassion is. And they quite liked me to say that I was educating and teaching compassionate self-care. It's interesting how people will accept different concepts. Now, to me, self-compassion is having the ability to care for yourself by being aware of your feelings and accepting these when you're experiencing difficult life problems and or work challenges. I mean, Christine Neff, for example, defines self-compassion being caring and compassionate towards oneself in the face of hardship or perceived inadequacy. And Paul Gilbert in the UK, he stated it's a basic kindness with a deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and other living things, coupled with the wish and effort to relieve it. So two important key words there: suffering, and obviously the importance of to relieve it. And Paul Gilbert even includes all other living things. So it's around that, because you can't get around suffering in life. And it is embedded in the Buddhist philosophy, which has been around for 2,500 years, and the three inevitables, which is aging, illness, and death. And we try to avoid it.
I really looked at self-compassion and tried to see where else it could be deployed, and I actually tried to really articulate in my own mind what it was. And at that particular time, I personally was going through some tough challenges. I had some personal bereavement. I'm of an age now where, like we all do in life, where you start to lose those around you that you love dearly. But when I think of self-compassion, I suppose I see it as being able to acknowledge pain instead of turning away from it. And I think self-compassion acknowledges life is hard for everyone, and that's exactly what Mary has just kind of pointed out there. And I also think part of self-compassion is not to self-judge, as I know my mind always likes to seek for flaws in my character. So it's about trying to not label yourself as not good enough in lots of different ways. I also think it's about trying to be kind to yourself and others. And a huge part of self-compassion is this notion of acceptance, such that you are open to your thoughts and your feelings and you don't really hide away from them. And I think there was a period of time in everyone's life where we've all done that before, where something has been difficult to deal with in our lives and we've kind of tried to hide away from it. I also think there's something in there in self-compassion that relates to validation, because I know I say to myself, come on, Stephen, it's time to man up when you have those difficult situations. But that in some ways is like providing an invalidation to yourself. So going through painful times at work or with family can also leave you slightly disconnected. So whenever that occurs in my own life and colleagues' lives, and when I've seen it occur in military colleagues that I've had in the past, it's always really great to spend time with family so that allows you to connect with people. And I think they're the central tenets of what self-compassion really is.
And I think some of what you've just said that really challenges, if I'm thinking about nurses and midwives, they're thinking about their patients, they're not thinking about themselves. And active people in the armed forces, it's about action. Stereotypically, they're very much not thinking about their own feelings. In fact, the sort of popular view might be that they're actively encouraged to suppress their feelings so they can go and do what they need to do. So these are two populations who it might be hard to encourage to look inwards. Is that fair?
Certainly from the military perspective, absolutely, Charlie. I think you've hit on a really important point, and I think there is a certain stigma that's attached to military members saying that they have an issue. But I think as a result of the last 10 years of those high tempo operations that occurred in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think people are much more aware of the issues that operational service can do. And also, I think people are much more aware of the issues that people have due to social media, and it's very much in the public's eye. So I think people are much more reflective and open to looking at self compassion. Certainly, military members looking at self compassion as a potential strategy to ameliorate those mental health risks that you get as a result of serving in austere environments.
So it's sort of quite a practical tool, really, rather than an indulgence.
Absolutely. And it's looking at forgiveness too. And what Kristen Neff says, it's good enough for health professionals and parents. I've done a good enough job. I'm good enough. And really trying to forgive ourselves, like Stephen said, like manning up, and I've got to be at this certain standard and this level. Whereas sometimes we've really got to dial it back. And I think Mary could probably take it from here in terms of looking at what I've done is good enough for today.
Yeah, we've just published a systematic review, and one of my postdoctoral students took the lead, Suika Hoffman. And interestingly enough, we looked at self compassion education for parents and their families while caring for their children. 7 of the 10 studies that met the inclusion criteria were actually parents with children with additional needs. And what was being demonstrated was that it did help them to cope when they were struggling as a parent, to give themselves the self-care and self-compassion that they need. But I wanted to go back because you did mention the nurses and the midwives when you were talking and veterans. And we're doing here, because I'm back up in the northeast of England at the moment. I'm at the University of Northumbria. And they're very keen to do work with nurses and midwives because we're not in a good place at the moment, especially in the UK. I don't know if you heard. I mean, first time, in 136 years, nurses are going on strike, because the conditions in the National Health Service are not good. How can you be compassionate to someone else if you're not compassionate to yourself? And what we're finding is it's not only the nurses and midwives, it's the next generation, it's our students. Our students are really struggling. And perhaps the added pressure because of the COVID pandemic, we're all coming out of that, aren't we? They're all struggling. Christine Neff talks about the 3 interacting components with a positive and a negative element. So, for example, it says self kindness versus self judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over identification. So, with the self kindness, it's like befriending yourself. So, you'd give yourself the same kindness you would give someone else. And not to be so judgmental. Steve just talked about, the self critic. I mean, I remember, as obviously you can't put a wise head on young shoulders, as my grandfather used to say. But I remember being very stressed as an adolescent, and my dad's a true Yorkshireman, our Wilf, and he'd say, "Oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're catastrophizing," which we do, don't we? And he'd say, "Well, you're not going in that direction. Just live in the present, the here and now." And obviously, from Yorkshire, have a cup of tea and it'll be right. All these little strategies, but they actually worked. And I am really concerned for our students now, the next generation. There's a lot of pressure on them at the moment to actually study and get a qualification and actually live. I think life in general has become quite challenging.
Yes, and then they're also training for a role that is incredibly responsible for somebody else's life. So are they feeling that pressure entering that profession as well?
Well, they are. And you remember, you are going to be accountable. You're accountable for what you do and you're accountable for what you don't do as a health professional. And also the mentors in practice, if they're are suffering from compassion or empathy fatigue, as some people describe it, and are burnt out, how likely are they going to be able to mentor? And when these students are in clinical practice, we're in a vicious circle now.
In both veteran environment and the healthcare environment, I'm sort of thinking that the public often talks about both types of people as heroes. Diane, I wonder if you could just give me your thoughts on that term and its effects.
Yeah, it's quite a loaded term, isn't it? A hero, because to have a hero, you have to have someone that you've saved. You have to have a victim, quote unquote. And so, yeah, it's very detrimental to healthcare professionals that may feel they have to live up to that standard.
No, I agree, Diane. And, that term hero can cast a shadow sometimes. And, the half life of that hero term can dissipate very quickly as well. And, notwithstanding the fact that Mary made some great points about the current state in the United Kingdom, we have nurses going on strike at the moment. But also, that's a very similar perspective to the United States. The nurses in New York, in the state of New York, are looking at strike action and feeling very undervalued at the moment, especially within this post-pandemic environment. But also, we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and those individuals who are coming into the profession are having to deal with so much more difficult circumstances than I did when I came into nursing in 1988. Many of our students have issues with food insecurity. Many of our students in the United States have issues, being single parents. The cost of textbooks are hugely expensive. So the stresses that our students are facing at the moment is absolutely huge. We are putting some strategies in place to try and ameliorate those risks. It can't be piecemeal. It has to be a national strategy. And I think we're in the United States, we're at the beginning of that work. But yeah, absolutely. That term hero, as Diana quite points out, it is a loaded term.
You're talking there about real food insecurity, lack of money. People also have housing issues, and so on, and this sort of deep fatigue after years of battling on through the pandemic and losing touch with other people as well. I think. Just to play devil's advocate, if do people ever turn around and say, "Goodness me, I haven't got time for self-compassion. How is that going to put a meal on the table?"
I always say you can always make time for self compassion, and it's unlearning bad habits. And I say to parents, when they say they're too busy, I says you can always do 3 minutes. Like Susan Pollack, who's done quite a bit of work about self compassion with parents, we can all spare 3 minutes, can't we? There's nobody more important than you. Because, like I said, if you are not well and maintain your health and well being, how can you care for anyone else? It has to start with you. And we have to recognise that too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Charlie, that was a great question, by the way. Because I think there probably are many people that say they're too busy to do this. But I think when you have that teachable moment, it could be something like going to your doctor for your annual review and your blood pressure is up or your cholesterol is up, and then you have the stress, related response to that. Then that teachable moment is what certainly pushes people towards self-compassion. Now, I've used a couple of examples that are a little bit severe and extreme, but it could be just feeling stressed at work. That can be the teachable moment. We're all professional people, so we may all have been there at one point where we've had to take a step back and say, okay, let's put some strategies in place here because I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling stressed, I don't feel part of the team.
Maybe it's a case of I've tried everything else and I've tried very, very hard, which is I've heard from all three of you that that's what people have been doing. They've been trying very, very hard, but they're still not winning. So this is a new strategy they can try.
And I think it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable, like sitting with that feeling as well, not feeling like you have to solve it. Health professionals are very, nurses, midwives, for example, are very, they're great problem solvers, and people in the military as well. And so it would be, okay, I have a problem, I have to solve it because this is what I do in my job. So I have to be task focused and do this, 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 and this. And I think some of those quote unquote soft skills around sitting with the emotion and letting it just be is something I think health professionals may need to learn more.
That's quite frightening, though, isn't it, potentially? How can people start doing that in a way that doesn't freak them out?
Yeah, some of the self-compassion skills, and for example, your heart is quite powerful, and you can use, to calm yourself, both of your hands and place the palms over your heart. I kind of find that okay, and I think I'm going to be okay. Why am I feeling like this? There's a reason. Something's triggered me. I'm going to just give myself just some calming and some in and outer calming breaths. And I'm going to put my hands on my heart, or some people prefer one hand on the heart and one hand on their abdomen, the solar plexus, just to take that time out, if you like, and to just calm and take those breaths. And you will, and then can calm your pulse and your blood pressure. There's links, obviously, with doing self compassion with actual mental health and also physical health and well-being benefits as well.
So the physical breathing and the postures that you take up, they're calming you physically. What happens next?
Well, when you do that, you'll induce a state of calmness and relaxation. And it's okay if you lose concentration because we're human beings and we do. But then to go back to some of the sort of self compassion skills that you can learn. And it's interesting because a couple of the students, and I was wanting to look at the difference, obviously, between the male students and the female students, because a couple were struggling with self compassion. And they were said, is it self regulation? And I said, what do you mean by that? And when he explained that, he said, when I struggle, I have to give myself such a hard time. I'm my worst critic. And it took quite a long time for him to actually realize that he actually can do this. He has it within. But he was realizing that there was some under sort of triggers, some guilt related trauma that he had to deal with. And the evidence, I know when we did the veterans review, it came out quite strong that self compassion skills were very good for guilt related trauma.
No, a great point, Mary. Many military service personnel come back with a wide range of guilt. It could be for the catastrophic events that happened, when you were engaging close to the enemy, or it may have been the loss of a very close colleague. Why them and not me? Because that's something that a lot of military personnel, certainly those colleagues who deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, that they've had. So guilt is not, it's not an obvious, negative feeling that people have coming back from operations. The person picking up a newspaper might not realise that, but guilt is a very strong feeling that a lot of active duty and military veterans have. And it was interesting to see that self-compassion had an ability to try to ameliorate and reduce the effects of that guilt feeling, which was really interesting. And I think that's what makes self-compassion really quite unique. I think you have these particular soft touch tools at your fingertips and simple techniques at your fingertips. They're low cost. You don't have to book an appointment for them. And also there are no side effects. So it makes the portability of self-compassion really accessible. And that's why I think we're seeing a move towards self-compassion being integrated into lots and lots of different walks of life.
There's something there around, do I deserve compassion? So if there's guilt about, that must be a barrier in itself. So it's almost like you need the self-compassion to deal with the guilt, but the guilt is going to be a barrier to you accessing it.
I've been doing some work with Bruce Perry's neurosequential model in terms of suicide prevention. You have the brain stem at the bottom of our brain, and then you have the midbrain, the limbic part of the brain, and then the cortical. I think there's a real connection there between what we're saying around self-compassion and, our brain stem keeps us alive, doesn't it? And it regulates our heart rate. And Bruce Perry's come up with another component to fight, flight, and freeze. And after the Christchurch earthquakes here in New Zealand, he created Flock. And so what he said is that when there's, say, an earthquake, people actually look at other people for some sort of signal. What should I do? Should I run? Should I duck for cover? And so that's now been updated to fight, flight, freeze, and now flock. And, our heart rate, like Mary was saying, it's within our brainstem. It really is the primal part of who we are. And then we have the midbrain, which looks at coordination of movement. And so some people, when they're stressed, they like rhythm, and they may rock, or they may go to music and that sort of thing. And then the limbic part of the brain is our emotional response to a situation. And then, of course, you have the cortical part, which is around empathy, controlling yourself, and things like literacy. So I think there's something around the brain that with self-compassion, it's trying to tap into those different components of our brain. So say you lose your keys, it doesn't matter what you're trying to say to yourself, where are my keys, the cortical part of our brain. If our heart rate is up high, our brainstem is saying you're stressed, there's no way you can access the cortical part of your brain to say, where are my keys? So it all comes down to heart rate, fight, flight, freeze, flock component of our brain. So we have to really calm our brainstem to be able to access other parts of our higher level functioning of our brains.
That sort of parallels with Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something, isn't it? I have to know I'm physically safe before I can start doing something creative or emotive or companionable.
Absolutely.
I was also interested in, two of you there mentioned, say, a learning moment, or when your heart is calmer, I'm feeling physically calmer, and then, as Diane's explained, then my sort of higher thinking skills can come in. And I'm going to be curious about what was it that made me feel stressed, and just investigate that a little.
I think it's having the skills to reflect on why did you feel like that, and what we talked about earlier, all about the acceptance, and that's how self-compassion can help you. Because somebody might say something or upset you, and you think, oh, and then you don't react as positively as you could have done, and then you have to reflect and you think, well, what was it that triggered me? Why do I feel hurt? And it's okay to feel like this, not to avoid it, to accept those emotions and feelings. Somebody might have been very rude to me, which can happen, when you're at work and you're thinking, well, I don't know what's going on in their life. I don't want to take that too personally, but what's triggered me, I'm going to have to accept these feelings, and then I can move on, and I know it'll get better. But we try to avoid it, but ultimately it will build up in your emotional tank, as we call it. I know Christine Neff tells a great story when she was flying from the States over to London, and her son's autistic. And she realized that she has to remain calm if there's an issue, on the aeroplane, and then he will calm. Otherwise, it will escalate. And it's kind of developing those skills of giving yourself compassion when things are not going quite well.
These strategies are all designed to try and allow you to become conditioned to be able to cope in stressful environments. And you have to practice these strategies. Some of the strategy Mary mentioned earlier on about the hand on the heart. There are breathing exercises that you can do, that you can practice. I think it's about trying to wear it lightly. Don't take it to heart. Don't let it fester in your brain, but it's about trying to wear it as lightly as you possibly can. And that's essentially what self-compassion is trying to do.
So intercepting the blame, the self-blame that can pile in there, and also the fear of the big emotions.
Well, absolutely. And it's about self-criticism, because we know the brain's got neuroplasticity properties, so it can evolve over time. So it's about trying to condition your brain to not go into that place. And those, self-compassion is a really nice group of little techniques that you can do to try and stop your brain from going into those difficult areas.
Diane, we've been talking about a range of sort of life moments, from the trivial sort of why isn't that person smiling at me, through to serious challenges within people's work roles. Can you talk a bit about how self-compassion can help people with suicidal thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The project I'm working on at the moment at the University of Bradford is I'm working with people that have had experience with suicide, family members or have been involved in that space themselves. And it's really interesting because I had a view that perhaps people would want to talk to a real person, as it were, to talk about their issues. And some of the folks in the advisory group have said, well, Diane, if I go online and I'm looking for a digital solution, I want to stay online. I don't always want to be signposted to a website or, to ring a number. And so I explored that further, and the folks said that they would actually like a live chat person, so not a robot, but someone they can chat with. And I thought, oh, okay. So I had these preconceptions, that everyone wants to talk to a real person, which a lot of people do. But yeah, it was really a learning experience for me that in terms of suicide prevention, people just want to have a qualified person online that can actually use the chat function, and it won't be a robot, but still have those empathy skills to help walk that person through that dark space at that moment in time.
But maybe one of the benefits of the chat function is there's some sort of anonymity you can, or privacy, whilst connecting. You don't have to kind of reveal your entire self to a person when you're feeling so vulnerable. But you definitely want more warmth and empathy and reality than a bot that's going to read a script to you.
Absolutely, yeah, and being connected, I think, is the key, isn't it? But you know if it's a bot and you know if it's a person. From the research I've been doing, the Samaritans seem to be the provider that are quite active in that space, which is really good to hear.
Mary, with the parents that you've worked with, they may or may not have great digital connections. What other ways can they connect with people so that they feel less alone?
Yes, you can do things online, and that's an option. But also, we are mammals and we like human contact, don't we? And the young people, I think they need each other. So they're not the only one. You remember I mentioned the components of self compassion that Christine Neff has pioneered, the self kindness, but the common humanity. Well, common humanity is the shared experience that we're not the only one. When we feel really bad, and maybe we've had a relationship breakup or we've got an illness, we're struggling, we think we're the only person at the time, but it's not. That's why it's that shared common humanity. I mean, I've run mothers groups, and we've done exercise with them, like low sort of resistance Pilates and things. But what always comes out strong is the support and befriending of their peers. So not only that, it's that group interaction that is really, really powerful as well. And they did say, obviously, during COVID, we've had to give parenting sort of education online, but they really do want that connectedness to actually help them to maintain their mental health and well-being.
And is self-compassion something that they can talk about amongst themselves, or is that quite an alien language?
It's interesting because they're really saying, like, what is self-compassion? And like I said, even when I was doing some education and training with nurses and midwives, they actually preferred that it's finding your self-compassion. So they liked that, okay. But they really said that we like compassionate self-care. And I went, okay, if that's what relates to you, it's being compassionate to yourself. Um, they understand that then. And self-compassion skills are for life. When you think self-compassion enables a person to accept and not avoid negative emotions and feelings when we're hurt or we might be suffering. And we all do at some time in our lives. So it's a healing process, and believe in that process, and we will come through the other end.
Yes, all these things shall pass.
Indeed.
Yes, that saying actually I teach my clients that, just to say it will pass. Say if somebody wants to lose weight, as an example, instead of saying to yourself, I've got to stop eating chocolate cake or chocolate, because that's keeping you in that negative self-talk, you turn it into, I'll eat more vegetables. I will go for a walk. So the language has to be more positive as well. I will do this, more future focused rather than I won't do that. So those are really easy techniques with self-compassion.
Another simple technique that I like as well, Dan, is just waking up in the morning and just, having a good dose of vitamin G, which is gratitude, and write 3 things that I've got gratitude for. And I know that that's a strategy that's used in a lot of organizations across the United States, because the more you do that, the more that you condition your brain into feeling good things, as opposed to focusing on the painful elements that you might be experiencing in your private life, or for that matter, in your professional life.
And I'm interested just to bring it right back round to your research, or other people's research in the field. Where do you see this going? Is it going to be more about how the brain operates, like Diane was telling us, or the impact in individual people's lives, or the changes in organizational performance? Where would you like it to go, Mary?
I think we need to look at maybe different target populations throughout the lifespan, because I do believe that everybody can benefit from self compassion. I mean, we've been involved now with 3 studies and reviews, and I've just recently finished one, but we're not published yet, on self compassion and the older people. Yes, I just finished my mental health postgraduate diploma in Nanten Institute in Australia, and it's saying the same thing. Older people, they might not be as mobile as there was before, so it's that acceptance. So I think there's some areas of interest there of how self-compassion skills can help right throughout the lifespan. But I think there's a need to do a little bit more research just to build on the emerging evidence that's only really been around for the last 2 decades. And I found it difficult to find funding that would fit in for research around the caregivers.
I agree. And the Indigenous populations around the world, I think there's lessons to be learnt from those groups, like the Aboriginal people, and then the Māori population in New Zealand, and then obviously other areas as well. Because I think Indigenous populations do have a lot to share that's probably been quite invisible to the Western world. And the term self-compassion may not be what they use, but I know in my culture, Māori culture in New Zealand, they use the term aroha, Aroha, which means can mean love, but it also means, the term in English is feel sorry for them. But I do think it's actually a type of compassion, and so I think there's something a bit of work to be done around that. What is it the Indigenous populations do that other cultures could learn from?
What is interesting, and Charlie, you mentioned this, specific areas that self-compassion has been deployed. I think potentially the sky is the limit, possibly, with self-compassion, notwithstanding the fact that we still have to do, more robust research. But in the United States, we're even seeing that, health insurance, if you are able to do some small courses offered by your employer, you can get a rebate on your health insurance. There are already organisations that are financially incentivising wellness, which has self-compassion central to that whole wellness piece.
So maybe there's a place for some partnership between the corporate world and the health and research world. There could be so much data gathered on, I don't know, absence rates, or, as I say, productivity even. I hate to, you use the word utility, I hate to make something that's so heartfelt and heart-based just utilitarian. But if that gets the funding, that would be great.
When I did some work in the Emirates and I was in Ras Al Khaimah and in Brazil, they all stopped for lunch. It was very important. There was myself, I kid you not, at my desk eating my sandwich, like as if I can't stop, And I thought, gosh, this is a really bad habit, Mary. Where have you picked this up from? Like you said, make time for self compassion. We've got to stay off our phones a little bit. Yeah, corporate needs to look at this.
The vision would be to have self-compassion, in organisations' strategic plans. I know certainly in my employer, the Ohio State University, within the College of Nursing, wellness and self-compassion is mentioned in the college's strategic plan, which is interesting, and it certainly shows the direction of travel in that organisation, which I was quite impressed with.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of the corporate world, they always talk about values and mission statements and that. And I think going to the values of an organisation and really living those values is a first step. And if self-compassion was one of the values, then that flows through the whole organisation because you use it for everything that you do. So that's a quick starter already, like not just having these values that they, recite once a year when they're audited, like really make that part of what people do, like showing kindness to colleagues, those sort of things, being accountable, that would really help.
I think to remember one thing, if nobody else remembers anything from this podcast, that you said, who can self-compassion benefit? Ultimately, everyone. And there is a need for education and training for these life skills, and this can be facilitated in a range of target populations.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find more information about our guests and a full transcription of the show on our website. I would like to thank Dr. Martin Whiteford for his help with today's episode, and this is Distorted.